Welcome, everybody. Glad you could join us this evening for a discussion of geothermal and houses of worship. We have a special guest beaming in from Champaign, Urbana. Chris Todd is joining us from St. Peter's UCC in Champaign, Illinois. And I'm David Arnosti, and joining us tonight are members of the Capital Area chapter of Michigan Interfaith Power and Light, as well as other friends. Good to see everybody. I'm making a recording of this so that we can refer to it back on the Michigan Interfaith Power and Light channel. I'd like to make a special shout out to Mark Lyon from the People's Church Green Team, who was really an essential catalyst in getting this activity started. We had a meeting last month. Mark, I don't know if you're on at this point. I can't see all the participants. If you are, give a hoot. Otherwise, I will continue. So just a couple of words. Michigan Interfaith Power and Light is part of a national network of interfaith power and light state groups. Our executive director, Leah Wisty, shown sitting next to the sign, leads a very effective team doing lots of programs across the state to help houses of worship achieve their goals for energy, environmental protection, and climate justice. One of those programs includes Sacred Spaces. This is a program which brought over $1 million to 11 low-income congregations across the state to do energy upgrades, install renewable energy systems, and more. And that's just one of the things that Michigan Interfaith Power and Light does. Our Capital Area chapter has come together in the last few years. We have over a dozen members. Shown on the sign, you can see we have houses of worship from many faith denominations. And in 2022, we came together and did a fundraiser and supported the Southside Community Coalition in South Lansing, which is a over 20-year-old community center that delivers lots of social programs for the neighborhood, and we solarized their headquarters. You can see a 13 kilowatt array on top of their roof, providing 100% of their electricity. And then in 2023, we partnered with the Ingham County Land Bank, which was building new affordable housing just a few blocks away from the Southside Community Coalition. And we did a fundraiser to solarize a new all-electric home that was being built for moderate income individuals who would be moving into this house. And with the solar panels that we provided, this house will have practically zero energy costs because it's an all-electric home that has heating and cooling provided with heat pumps. And that's the topic for this evening. So just a couple of diagrams. Not to go into all of the nitty-gritty on the physics, but heat pumps are a modern way for heating and cooling because they move heat around rather than burning fuel to produce heat. And moving heat is much more efficient and is much greener than any other method for heating and cooling. You may have seen heat pumps on houses in the area or commercial buildings, which work as air conditioners in one direction and heaters in the other. A special kind of heat pump is a geothermal system where instead of extracting heat from the air, you're extracting heat from the ground, which is even more efficient and particularly suitable for cold climates. One of the probably most prominent examples of ground or geothermal systems is our own state capitol. This diagram shows an extensive well system, which has circulating coolant or fluid behind our state capitol. And this new system that was just finished 2 years ago provides all of the heating and cooling needs for the state of Michigan's historic capital and saving lots of money in the process. A number of houses of worship I know have been considering doing something similar, and we thought it would be really interested to hear an experience from somebody who's actually gone through this. Chris Todd from St. Peter's Church was their church was featured on the internet for their recent work, and she's going to share with us some pictures and description of how their house of worship went about updating, modernizing, and making more green their whole heating and cooling system. So, Chris Todd, welcome. Thank you very much for coming, and pleased to have you join us.
Well, thanks so much for having me. And sorry for the technical problems. I thought I had avoided those, but I'm glad this will work. Well, I'm going to share my screen at this time. That'll be more interesting to look at than me holding the phone. And we'll just get started. All right, maybe we'll get started. Well, I think we'll just do it with this. I can't get it to show it in the full screen, but we will do just fine with this presentation, I think.
Yeah.
Can everyone see it?
We're looking at your church, and it says Geothermal Solar Project.
That's it. All right. Well, I wanted to start with a picture of the church, and I'm sorry to show you one at night, but it was the only picture I had that kind of showed the layout of the church, because that will help you understand a little bit about what we did. St. Peter's Church, this building was built in about 1957. It was pretty high tech at the time, but now it has very old technology, and we have a huge boiler that uses steam heat to heat our facility, and of course the traditional electrical hookups. Our sanctuary, you would go in this door and it goes that way. This is our office wing, and underneath it is our large fellowship hall where we have large gatherings. Underneath the sanctuary on the lower level is our classroom wing, and that's what has, we have a lot of programs in it. And then behind this wing is another cutout kind of, which is our kitchen. So that is basically how our church is laid out. I thought tonight I'd tell you a little bit about why we did this project, what we did, the cost of the project, and the savings we are anticipating and getting some of already, and then a little bit of what we learned along the way. We did not have a lot of surprises, but I have learned a lot. And maybe there's some things I can share with you that might help others that are doing this project do it maybe more efficiently or know what you're getting into better. We started the project about 3 years ago, primarily to reduce expenses. We do have a green team and we do care about the environment, but I have to be upfront and said that the budget was the driving factor. Like many churches, we've lost members over time. We've got a big facility to maintain, and our budget's a little underwater sometimes. So this was an avenue to actually be able to reduce some of our expenses. But it also fulfills our mission, and we recently had a visioning project, and joyous care for the earth was one of the main things that we want to focus on. And of course, this project does that. And then the last thing was the time was right to do this project. There were so many incentives now in ways that were usable by churches much easier than in the past. So doing it right now made sense. And that's another major reason about why the project came together so quickly. Okay, here's a top-down picture of our church. This is the front door here, and this is the sanctuary. This is the office wing here. Our chapel is off to the right there. And our kitchen, you can't see it too much, but it's kind of right on the edge of that. And what we tried to do, we wanted to look at both geothermal and solar. Our building, when it was built, did not have air conditioning at all. And over the years, we air conditioned the fellowship hall, which is under our office wing. We air conditioned the sanctuary and also our chapel. But the spaces that we use all the time, we did not air condition. And so our office staff had little air conditioners in their offices, but in the summer, the hallways were terrible. And if you went into any of the rooms that weren't used, it was really not pleasant. And again, our classroom wing, which is under the sanctuary, was a little bit cooler because it's partway underground. And but still was not comfortable at all. And we have a big food pantry that meets once a month, and we're busy packing food and taking them out the door, and it was just not pleasant. So we wanted to think about being able to not only move to renewable energy, but also solve the problem of not having air conditioning in those three spaces. We tried to think about doing geothermal for the whole church, but it was just cost prohibitive for the money that we had available. So we ended up focusing on the three areas that did not have air conditioning. And we actually got estimates for conventional air conditioning versus geothermal. And in the office wing and the classroom wing, the geothermal was actually more cost effective than to put in all the ductwork and everything we needed for conventional air conditioning. The kitchen was a little bit less expensive with conventional air conditioning, but we just felt that we wanted to have a little extra expense and go with the geothermal there. So what we have put in are three 5-ton units that come off of 6 loops in the ground. I'll show you a little bit of a schematic about that in a minute. These loops are for the kitchen and the office wing are located here. They drilled down 250 feet with a wonderful machine that just went right down. It takes and pulls out some of the soil as it goes along. And then originally they were going to cut our driveway to connect the wells to where the heat pumps essentially were going to be, which was right here outside the back door. We were so fortunate because our contractor found a well driller who would actually drill underneath the parking or the driveway. So we did not have to cut the driveway, and that was a great savings on our part and a lot less interruption of our daily activities. So essentially they drilled down 250 feet, then they took a machine and drilled under the driveway, drilled all the way up to where these heat pumps are outside. The holes come up underneath the heat pumps, which I'll show you in a minute. And then from the back of the heat pumps, there are lines going into the building. So that's how we get those wells to connect to our building there. For the classroom wing here, we had a similar situation. We dug wells over here, and they drilled under the driveway here up to the back of the building. This unit we decided to locate inside. It's a different type of unit. It's a Dicon unit, and it does not have the connection coming up from underneath it. So we would have had to insulate that unit on the outside heavily. And we felt that that really was going to not look very good, and there was really the potential for more damage if something went wrong. So we had them drill through our 18-inch thick walls into a little storage area we had there and located the machine there. And I'll show you a picture of that in just a minute. We also, at the same time, really wanted to put in solar, and we have a slate roof, so putting it on the roof is not feasible. We're fortunate in that we have a large campus. We're in the middle of a residential area, but we bought the church a long time ago, and so we have this beautiful land around us, and we were able to locate the array on the property. Because our solar operators saw what our well driller was going to do, they looked into the possibility of drilling underground as well and found a communications company that drills for putting fiber cables in. And so they came and they actually drilled underground all the way from this array, all the way over here underneath our driveway and up to the building and back where the solar array connected with our electrical system. So we were so fortunate to find that. I highly recommend that if you're considering doing this. There was no repair we had to do to the lawn. We didn't and the driveway. It was much better to do it that way. And then this unit here that I talked about is a 10-ton unit, and it's a different type of unit. It's more technologically complex because it allows many more zones and we needed that in the classroom wing for reasons I'll mention soon. The array that we put in was 69,190 kilowatts, and that was sufficient to power our building based on the highest year of electrical use we'd had in the last 10 years, plus the added cost for running the geothermal units. So at this point, we designed our system so that we should have a zero electrical bill. And as we added in all this air conditioning capacity, we should have no extra charge for that. And so far, that has been the case. Our electrical bills have been minus $8 or $9 every month. And we are building a credit because we're producing more electricity in the summer that should then carry that over, those savings over through until next summer when the sun is shining longer again. All right, so that's basically what we did. This is a picture of our solar array. We put a 5-foot fence around it. There's a long story about that I can tell you, related to codes and all sorts of things. The short story is they told us we didn't need a fence at all. But if we did have a fence, it had to be 6 feet tall with barbed wire on top. And so it was a situation of codes coming from different parts of the city code. We finally talked them into reason. We had the city inspector out and he realized we did not need that. Part of the reason is we put some mesh across the back of our panels so that no one could get at the electrical wiring. And that was the reason we didn't need to have the fence. But we are next to a school, and of course we have children, we hope, coming in our congregation, so we felt a fence was wise, and we've been happy with it. The congregation was not at all comfortable with having the array on the ground. It was taking up our property. It was very visible when you come in. Now it's just a part of the property. Nobody pays any attention to it at all, so it's worked out fine. All right, so here's the process with the geothermal. Here are the wells that they drill down, and as they drill down, they take out the dirt and things that are in there. As you get down below a foot or two, you start getting into this nasty clay. We've got a lot of clay. And so the stuff that came up was really filled with clay and not the kind of dirt that you'd really like on top. Right here, you can see the cables that are coming out. These then, the wells are connected to one another after they do this drilling. And then they take these, they go and drill through here and hook these cables up and send them over to the building. And this is the units that they were sending them over to. Here you can see they've actually dug up some of the soil and then they've put it over the cables. So they dug it up to get the conduit to these units, and then they filled it in again. But you can see it's pretty raised there, and our contract did not include them grading and seeding and things. We had to do that ourselves. So just so you can see what it's like a little bit later, this was after we had leveled those well areas, and this is what it looks like today. I actually went and took a picture. So we have not actually seeded. Most of this is weeds, but we will start trying to reclaim that more now in the spring. So you can see that you can get your spaces back to normal. All right, these are the 3 water furnace units that we have. They're pretty simple design. They're the heat pump part of things. You can't see the tubes that connect to the building. They go straight back and then they go through the wall. And on the other side of this is a stage that's at the end of our fellowship hall. The tubes go through the wall and then go up the wall and into the ceiling and then go back to go back up into the classroom wing eventually. So you don't see the tubes, the conduit, after it gets up into the ceiling. And this is on the classroom wing. On the, okay, so, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't tell you about this is the Dicon system. You can see down here, this is where the actual conduit comes in from outside. This part comes over here and down through here and then over and connects to the heat pump here, and then this one comes here and goes through and connects up here. These are the uh, pipes essentially that carry either the cooled liquid or the heated liquid up, and they go up into the ceiling and out into the ceiling in our classroom wing. So that's how the fluid that is either cooled or heated by the ground gets into our building. Now, what happens then is the conduit, I'll show you the one for the kitchen because I can show you this more easily. The conduit comes in and down through here, and it's carrying that liquid, and it goes into the air handler. In the air handler, the liquid heats or cools the air, depending on what's called for, and then that air comes up through here and out through the ductwork. This system was what was needed in our kitchen. We do not have a crawl space above here. We have a flat roof, and so we had to put the ductwork so it was visible. In the other parts of the church, like upstairs in the office wing, the ductwork is in the ceiling, so you don't even see it. All right, so that's basically how the cool air or the hot air gets into the kitchen. Up in the classroom wing, which is upstairs, what they had to do was take out our ceiling and lift up the air handlers into that space above it. And we have a very large space above our classroom wing. And so it was no problem having space up there for those air handlers, but getting them up there, there was no way they could take it up a little hatch that we have access up there. So they had to actually take out part of the ceiling and then put it back. Now that it's up there and everything, you don't even know it's there. They put the ceiling back, the hanging ceiling. It looks just like a normal ceiling. The only difference is there are vents in the ceiling that the air comes out of. And my apologies, I don't have a vent to show you, but basically it's just like a vent in the ceiling, and that's where the air comes out. So upstairs we have 2 vents in each room and also in the hallway. The smaller offices share a thermostat. The system that we put in only allowed so many thermostats. Now, I found out today we could have had a little larger system put in and been able to have a thermostat in every room, but of course that would have cost more. So we are having a little bit of problem because our main office and our business office share a thermostat. And what we have found is that the main office is hotter in general than the business office, and that's partially because we have the copier in there and other equipment that's giving off more heat, and partially because the sun shines in those windows more. So we are having a little trouble regulating those 2 offices, but they are going to be putting in a mechanical damper on those ceiling vents so that we can close off the business manager's office a little bit, and hopefully that will reduce the temperature in there, and also in the summer make it cooler in the main office, which they need. We have still kept our steam heat going into all of these areas. And the reason for that is that Illinois has the potential to get very cold. We don't get terribly cold often, but it has gotten down to 20 below here. And heat pumps are not terribly helpful after the low 30s in general. Now, it varies a little bit as to where you are. Here, our ground temperature is a steady 45 degrees. Other places it may be slightly different. So for us, when it gets down closer to freezing, the heat pump has a harder time heating this space. And so you need some sort of supplemental heat. And one of the options is to put heat strips in. That's very commonly done. For us, that would have required us to bring in another electrical circuit, which would have cost another $40,000. And so we just decided to keep our radiator heat as this backup on that. What we have found is we hardly need to use it. The heat pump does seem to really do a pretty good job at most of the temperatures that we had last year. We'll see what it's like this year. So far, that's been a good decision. The challenge, of course, is whenever we're doing that, then our boiler is using natural gas, which is what we'd like to get rid of. So at some point, I think we are going to be thinking about putting those heat strips in and then sealing off this part of the building so that we don't have to use the boiler to heat it. All right, this is the hallway in our downstairs classroom wing. And it's on each side of here, you've got office classroom spaces going off. Some of them are double rooms, some of them are single rooms, but we set them up so that each half of a double room has the potential, has its own thermostat, because we can pull the divider between them and use them as separate rooms as long as they have heating and cooling. These rooms do still have the radiators in them, but we do not use them. We didn't even use them before we got the geothermal. This part of the facility is underground. There's ground on that side. There's not ground on that side, but it keeps it warm enough that we don't even need to use the steam heat there. All right, what they had to do here was add some access panels up here so that they could get up in this crawl space to get the conduit, bringing the fluid into here so that then they could take it off into each space. The problem is that our old building was built before sheetrock. And so I don't know if you can see here, but this is actually like cement, and it's embedded in a wire mesh. So they had to cut through all of that to put these access panels in to be able to get up there. And they had to do two panels, one here, you can just barely see the other one there. And then the installers only had about 24 inches of height up here to work with. So they had to crawl along their stomach all the way up in here. And I will tell you, I have such incredible respect for the people that do this work. And that is one of the things we learned. You need to pick your contractor carefully. Not all contractors want to take the time to deal with old buildings, but this contractor did, and they did an excellent job. And every day they had to deal with some sort of problem that they would run into because of working in an old building that had been modified several times and had old technology. But they surmounted it every day, and we got a wonderful system out of it. In each of the rooms, these are essentially the little air handlers there. That you can't see it here. You can see it here. Here's the fluid coming into this ceiling mounted one. On the wall mounted ones, the fluid comes over from here into it. And then the air blows out through here. On this one, it blows out through vents that open up here. We had to have the ceiling ones put in because the city code required it. They are very concerned about the quality of the air, and they want to make sure you have enough air coming into every room. So they actually required us in some of the smaller spaces to punch a hole here and bring fresh air into the room so that there would be enough room, fresh air for this unit to work properly. So that's why we couldn't have all wall-mounted units. The city required us to have this one. Now, this was kind of ugly when they put it up, and I said, well, I don't know about that. And so what they did was build a box to go over it. So this is what this unit is now inside of this box. And again, at first it was like, wow, that's a big box, but now it's just part of the room and you don't even pay any attention to it. The air coming out in all of the rooms this summer was able to cool the space beautifully. We had no problems with it. It was delightful. And it also takes the humidity out of the air. So it was such a pleasant space to be compared with everything else that we had gone through before. I want to tell you our timeline. We started in 2001 working with Faith in Place, which I believe has some connections with the Interfaith Power and Light system. And they recommended that we go to things called power hours. Here in Champaign, Urbana, we have both geothermal and solar power hours, and it's where the community can come to look at how to do these systems. And we learned so much, and that's where we got hooked up with the contractor that we used for both the geothermal and the contractors that we used for both the geothermal and the solar. Between 2021 and 23, we worked with the geothermal contractor to develop the proposals. He came in and he evaluated our whole HVAC system, did multiple proposals to try and get it to the point that we could use it. We tried doing it in the whole building, but it was just not possible, and so we worked down to the 3 areas. He did this at all at no cost to us, hours and hours and hours of his time. And I asked him why he did that. This is not usual. And he said, well, partially we love geothermal. We want to promote it. And he said, the other thing is we found it's good for our business. We may not get a contract out of this for geothermal, but when people need HVAC things put in, they call us. So that was his rationale for putting all that time in for free. We did, of course, go ahead and do it. In March, I would say, of 2003, we really started thinking about funding and how we would do that. And by April, we pretty much had our plans pretty well underway. And we then took the month of July to present the program to our congregation. We sent out a letter first, and then we had 4 meetings that took the last 10 minutes of every Sunday service, where we laid out why we needed to do this, what we were going to do, how we were going to fund it. And then the last session was another opportunity for questions and actually voting on the proposal. The congregation had wonderful questions. Fortunately, we thought about them ahead of time, and so we all had answers that I think the congregation felt were good. And we had no problem getting the program approved through the congregation, which is amazing to me. Then what we had to do, we had elected not to do the geothermal engineering study or the solar engineering study before we got congregational approval. Each one would have cost about $5,000, and we just didn't want to go have that expense, given we didn't know if the congregation would approve it. So in August, we did the engineering study. This is a very critical part because your building codes come in here and your local planning commission probably has to approve any plans that you have, and it's a risky time. The city can come up with something that you hadn't anticipated. One thing that they did wonder about was whether we had enough airflow in our kitchen, given that we had a kitchen hood. And they did some testing, and fortunately they decided we did have enough airflow, so we didn't have to put in another whole air system. So that turned out fine. In October, we started construction on the geothermal units, and they were operational at the very end of December. We still had some sort of touch-up work to do on the system. So we elected, and we were also having the solar installed in January. So we elected not to actually turn on the geothermal for several months, partially because during the solar installation, we had doors open all the time and a lot of cold air coming in. And we really felt that the boiler would be fine, or be better suited to handling that. And that turned out to be a fine decision. In January, we did the engineering study for the solar. There were not any surprises with that, and they began construction, and it became operational at the very end of February. So really a very short amount of time in terms of building, and we had no problems during this time. All right, for funding, the total cost of the project, including our financing costs, is a little over $510,000. Most of it is for the geothermal system. And of course, remember, our building had to have huge retrofits to get the ductwork in. So it may turn out that another building that has things already, the ductwork already in there, may not be as expensive, but it was an expensive proposition for us. The solar was much less expensive. financing. The majority of that cost, close to $8,000, was the upfront cost to get the loan. The interest has been not very high. And I'll give a plug to the United Church of Christ Cornerstone Fund. I'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. That's open to all congregations, and they offer lower cost loans for these kinds of projects, and we found them good to work with. All right. I've got the total cost being a little bit wrong there, but it's close. We were able to take that cost and reduce it with several things. We had local and state programs that got us $32,500. We had what are called SRECs. They're basically Illinois has required our publicly operated utility companies to buy carbon offsets or to have a certain amount of carbon offsets. And so those companies buy projects like ours, the carbon offsets for projects like ours, and we get the money from that. So a pretty substantial amount is coming from that. And then our federal rebates on the two projects were $138,000. So when you subtract those out, our cost only ended up to be $286,000, which was 56% of the actual cost of the project. So that was really a very big encourager for us to do that. If we break this down now by, how did we fund this part from our church? We had a restricted fund that a member had donated a number of years ago that was specifically for air conditioning. And since the geothermal project was to put air conditioning in part, we were able to use that fund. We also, like most churches, have memorial funds, so we used $15,000 from that. We did a capital campaign, and we had a goal of $40,000, and we actually got more than that, $52,100. And we encouraged people to give as much as they could up front so that we could reduce the amount of the loan that we asked for. And they did do that. So we got the vast majority of that in upfront the year, even before, and the year that we did the project. And then the rest of it is going to come from the energy savings we're getting, especially from the solar array. We're going to use the first 12 years of energy savings to completely pay for the project. And the reason we have to do that is we needed to get some gap loans in place. Even though we didn't have to pay as much for the project, that was after all the rebates, and those rebates don't come all right away. And so we needed to have, and also our capital campaign didn't have the money in it right away. So we did need to get some gap financing. We were able to borrow from an endowment fund that the church had or has, and it's restricted to mission. So we were not able to use the principal of it, but we could borrow the money and pay it back. So it's the energy savings that we're going to use to pay back that part of the loan. We still couldn't quite close the gap, though. We still needed another $194,000 to finish the project, and that is where we took the loan out from the United Church of Christ Cornerstone Fund. And because our project was more than $100,000, we had to pay a blended rate of what the Cornerstone Fund would charge for a new construction loan, and the lower rate that they would charge up to $100,000 for the renewable energy projects. So we got a combined rate of 6.821%. We got in on this project. We started this project just as the rates were going up. We thought it would be lower when we started, but by the time we got the contract through, it had gone up to 6.821%. But still, for a short-term loan, that really isn't too bad. So now if you look at the geothermal cost, because I want you to see about the reductions here. The total cost was $324,800. We had a federal rebate of $90,690. We are still waiting for that. We don't think we're not going to get it, but this was the first year under the new rules. And of course, they were rolling out the system. And so initially, we thought we had to send in a paper tax return. And so we did that. But then it turned out you had to do it online. So then we had to go back and do it online. So it slowed our rebate down a bit, but we are fairly confident we should be getting that in the next month or two. Our local utility offered a rebate on heat pumps, so we were able to get that. And then there's in Champaign-Urbana, the local geothermal companies and the city, I believe, the cities have what's called a group buy program. So they try and pool all of the projects for geothermal, and if they get to a certain tonnage, you get a rebate. And so our tonnage that we put in, combined with all the tonnage for all the other projects done in the area, got to the highest level. And so we were able to get $10,000 back from that. So that reduced our cost down to $211,610, which is 65% of the cost, the actual cost of the project. And then on the solar side, we really got a deal on this. The total cost was $173,000. Our reductions, we got the federal rebate, we've got that SREX that I mentioned to buy our carbon offsets, and then we got a $10,000 grant from Faith in Place. So that brought our actual cost down to only $61,000, which was 36% of the project. In terms of energy savings, we are anticipating a 37% reduction in energy cost in the year. That's primarily from having a zero electrical bill. Right now, they have what's called net metering in Illinois, so we get both the delivery and the supply charge written off. That is going away at the end of this year, and so in the future, it won't be as good a deal. You will only get the supply cost written off. But right now, and for the next 20 years, we're anticipating a zero electrical bill. We also, on the gas side, we are going to see some savings from putting the geothermal in 3 spaces. We think it's going to be about $3,000 a year, and that's kind of on track for what it should be this year. So we will have a small savings there. In total, we hope to save 44 tons of carbon dioxide equivalents going into the air each year. So we're really happy about that too. If we look at our energy savings over 30 years, we should have over $500,000 if all goes as planned. Of course, we don't know. Excuse me, because that's dependent on what the cost of the gas and electric is. And we can't predict that right now, but costs tend not to go down. So I think we will make this. And so when you think about our actual out-of-pocket cost was less than $300,000, we should still clear about $200,000 over the next 30 years on this project. And then lastly, I just talk about some of the things I've mentioned some already. The contractors are absolutely key. They will help you get a good plan. They will find sources of funding for you. And most importantly, if you have an old building, you need contractors who are willing and understand old buildings because they are not easy to work in. The congregation is key. If you can't bring them along, they won't approve the project. And what we found was giving absolutely full information, being willing to come on multiple occasions and answer all the questions, really made the congregation feel comfortable about the project. And when I say this in that we are a small congregation, we have usually 30 people on Sunday in our worship service, and I think our membership is 88 people now. So we are not a large church, and this was a huge project. But people recognized that it was part of our mission, and it also would pay for itself within a reasonable amount of time, and also would reduce our costs long term. Project coordination and having a project coordinator is important. I was the project coordinator for this group, and I can tell you I worked pretty much 40, 50 hours a week during the thick of this. coordination, keeping all the groups coordinated and the congregation fully informed and your decision-making body fully informed really takes a lot of time. And if you have someone who knows your building from a mechanical standpoint, they need to be there at every major installation because you're always running into something and they need to know, well, where does this wire go? Or if I drill through this wall, am I going to hit anything? And so it's absolutely essential that the person that knows your building and can have access to the schematics can be on site whenever they're doing any major construction. The engineering study is really important, even though you have to pay for it. You have to have it in most places, I'm sure, because you have to get permits. And this is the place where you have a check on your contractor, in a sense. The city is not going to let something go by just because a contractor might propose it. Now, our contractors were right on top of things, so outside of the city being very cautious about airflow, there were no surprises at all. They approved everything. This is the one thing I would say pay attention to. If you have to make choices about linking rooms, think very carefully about that and link the proper spaces. We are, having people with two different comfort levels for temperature now that are in offices that heat differently, that we're trying to find solutions for. So you might want to think about going up to a little bigger system that would allow you to have separate thermostats in each room if that's feasible for you. That's the easiest way. And then the last thing I guess I would say we learned is maintenance costs. Once the installation is put in, both solar and geothermal, it's on you then to maintain it. During the first year and sometimes longer, you have guarantees that if something goes wrong, it'll be fixed for free. But after that, you don't. And you have to pay for routine maintenance. And with these systems, especially the geothermal, most people do not know how to do maintenance on these and are not qualified to do maintenance on these. These are not like the old boilers that people grew up with and maintained for 50 years and know how to do it, or even traditional HVAC systems that people have somehow learned things to do over the years. So you do need specialists to come in and do this. And in the geothermal, it's very essential to do this on a regular basis because the loops that go into the ground can expand and contract, especially when they're first put in. So they have to add fluid to the system to make sure that they're pressurized at the right temperature or the right pressure. And so that's critical to do. The other thing is that all of these units have filters in them that have to be changed or at least checked every 3 months. And that's critical too for airflow. We just had our maintenance today and we are now allowed to change our own filters. So that means that we will only have to have the maintenance in a couple times a year. It costs about $1,100 every time they come in to do this major maintenance. So at the minimum, we're going to pay about $2,200 a year to maintain the geothermal. And that's, of course, if nothing goes wrong. In talking to a group that had put in geothermal 20 years ago in essentially a dorm, they said they had very, very few problems throughout the years if they did maintenance the way you were supposed to do it. So that gave me some hope, I guess. If a well fails, and can happen, essentially you have the cost of drilling a new well. There's no way they can go down and repair that well. So that is something to think about. But that very, very seldom happens, I'm told. But it is a possibility. We did need to have this put on our insurance, and our insurance went up, I think about $1,200 because of this system. And the solar array, not just the geothermal. So that's another thing to think about. There will be those added costs. On the solar side, you can get a contract, or you can kind of watch the meters on yours and call them if there's a problem. And so we elected to do the watching because we kind of like to do that. We did have the system go down twice. Once was during the time of the solar arrays, and a lot of systems were thrown offline. But it was just very, very I'm sorry, solar flares. I'm sorry, not solar arrays. And it was just off briefly and it came back up on its own. Second time it went down, it was because it was not communicating properly with the system that records how much electricity we're producing. And that's important because we have to document that for those SRECs that we get. And the system was still working, but it was saying that it was offline. It turned out that there was a wrong IP address or something on that reporting system, and so it was fixed, and we didn't have to pay anything for that call. But if something happens on our array and it breaks for some reason, then we do incur the costs of fixing that. So you do have to, just like any system that you have, you will have potential breakdowns and you'll have to pay for those. And you definitely will have routine maintenance. And the difference with these systems is people can't do it themselves that are used to fixing their HVAC and their wiring in their building. So at that point, I think I am done with my presentation and I would be very happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Chris. If you'd like to turn off your screen sharing so that we can
I
go
will
back
do
to
that. Now,
gallery. And if somebody has a question, please speak up. Hit the green button or I can undo this.
I'm having something so I can't see. Oh, wait, here, now I can stop it. I had something over the top of it.
Very
I
good.
couldn't find the button.
Yeah.
Okay.
Does anybody have a question?
I appreciate the presentation. It's helping us to really understand, help me to really understand the work ahead if we go forward with this. But it seemed like you really did your homework. It seemed like you really got a good deal as well.
Yeah.
Couple questions I have. One is how did it expand to the sanctuary, or are you doing something different with in the sanctuary area? The other question is it a noise factor? Is the system quiet, or is it kind of loud? I'm assuming it's
Okay.
quiet.
The system is very quiet. You don't even know it's there. I mean, you hear air coming out of the vents, but you would if it had a regular air conditioner too. I find it actually quieter than the old window air conditioners for sure that we had. So for us, it was a very quiet system. In terms of the sanctuary, it's a very large space, and it has air conditioning that comes down from the ceiling. That will make it harder to use geothermal in there because in the winter, because the heat wants to go, rise, and we want the heat to go down. So we are actually not sure what we're going to do there, but it's probably not going to be geothermal in the sanctuary. It may be more traditional heat pumps, or we may even think about, can we do a heat pump that would heat the water that goes through our radiator system in there, since we have that. We are thinking about putting geothermal in the chapel and also in our fellowship hall. That would be much easier to do, not terribly expensive. And so after we start paying back these loans and things, I'm fairly confident that the church will want to pursue that. We definitely want to get rid of that big boiler as fast as we can. We do not need it anymore to heat the building for most of the time, and there's no sense in keeping that hot water going all the time.
Tessa had her hand up, and then Mary.
I can let Mary go first. She's on my building committee, and she's the one working most closely on this. So I'll let you go first.
Thank you.
Mary.
Can you give us an approximate number of square feet that you heated or cooled in your building with this system?
Oh boy, I don't think so.
Since you've only done part of it.
Right. I would guess I don't even think I can do this. Maybe our office wing and our classroom wing might be 100 feet long by maybe I don't know, 40 feet wide, something like that. Our kitchen is probably 50 by 40, maybe something like that. What I could do is get you those figures. I really have to look at the size of I may be underestimating terribly, but
For a home system, 2,000 square foot home, 3 tons is enough. You have about 5 times that, so I'm guessing you're maybe 10,000 square feet. That's
yeah, okay,
just a rough estimate.
that helps.
I thought she had 20 tons. I thought she had 2 5s and a 10 or something on that first slide. She had
We've got 25 tons altogether.
Yeah.
We've got 15 and 10. Yeah, so it's
So that would
25
be
tons altogether.
Oh, that would be 16,000 square feet. Okay.
Okay.
Something of that order. Yep. Thank you.
My my other question is, did you give any thought to putting batteries in conjunction with your solar panels?
We did, but when we looked at the battery, everybody we talked to said that the battery technology just wasn't ready yet. That the cost was very high and the storage capacity was not what it should be. And when we got an estimate, just a real rough estimate, they were talking in terms of $250,000, and that just didn't seem feasible. Now, that was to actually power our building the way we would do it. We could get a very small system to keep critical systems going for $50,000. But if we were going to do it, we would want to actually have, the building run off of the battery powers. Now, that my understanding is since we looked at that, because this was several years ago, the battery situation has gotten better, and that it may be more feasible to do it now. But it was both the cost, it was also an environmental impact of what the storage batteries were, using to do, and then since our utility was giving us free electricity and it doesn't go down very much, it just seemed like it wasn't worth it at that time.
Well, yes, the only reason it crossed my mind at some point is our building's utility doesn't use net zero.
Oh, yes.
And so I have it at my house and I'm on a net zero program, but our synagogue building is in a different power system and you only get half back, roughly.
Right.
Speaking. So
that would make a difference. That would, and truly, I would look into it, because, like I said, the technology, I'm told, has gotten better. That's where all the efforts are going right now with solar, is in the battery storage. That they are doing pretty well with the panels. They've got that pretty efficient and things, and now they're really working on the storage side of things.
Tessa, and then Liza had her hand up as well.
Wonderful.
Tessa, did you want to ask a question? And then Liza had her hand up.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I've got a couple questions. Mary, were you finished?
Yes.
Okay. So my first questions are about like the process. And you mentioned that you did a visioning, like a strategic visioning process, and I wondered how crucial that was to like congregation buy-in and kind of knowing what to pursue when. And I'm also curious in terms of the process, like, was this all your green team, or was there a building committee? Was it all paid staff who worked on this, or volunteers, that kind of thing? I'm not hearing.
We can't
Chris
hear you,
right
Chris.
now. Maybe David needs to.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. The visioning process helped, but wasn't critical, because our congregation already had a strong emphasis on renewable energy. But it really helped reinforce it. It made our messaging much easier, because we could point to something in our vision now that said, joyous care for the earth. Here's what we're doing. This is where that project fit. We had only volunteers involved in doing the planning. And initially it involved our building and grounds chair and myself. and mostly doing the investigating. Eventually, toward the end, we pulled together a committee that represented building and grounds, finance, our consistory, which is our decision-making body, and there may be one other group that was part of that. Our green team, surprisingly, didn't get very involved in this. They were much more into gardening and recycling. And so they were busy on those projects. They, gave 2 thumbs up to the project, but they saw it was already being taken forward by others, so they were happy to let that happen.
Okay, thank you. That's inspiring. My only other questions were about the contractor. If you could speak a little more about how, finding your contractor. One thing I noticed because of where we are in our considerations is that the engineering report came relatively late in the process timeline, and it sounds like you started with a a contractor who you really trusted, and I was just wondering if that's an HVAC contractor who does geothermal, or
yeah, we
were
hooked up with
like,
we hooked up with this contractor at the Geothermal Power Hour. He was the contractor that was designated by them to go to if you had questions, and so we really liked him. Again, he was working for no money. And I had been part of a different congregation that had separately gotten a plan from a different contractor to put geothermal in that building. So I had a little sense of how to evaluate his plan. His plan seemed almost more thorough and was less costly than the other one. So that gave me a little confidence in some ways. Plus having recommendations from others of the systems he'd put in. So that's kind of how we went with that. And he would have done the engineering study anytime we wanted. We just chose not to do it until the end because honestly, I wasn't sure if our congregation would approve this. It's such a big project for such a small congregation. And we just didn't want to spend $5,000 or $10,000 for no reason.
So regarding the question about contractors, I did have a chance to talk to Jim Hall, their contractor. Their firm has been doing this for 40 years. I think his father was involved in geothermal. So they've put in around 2,000 plus systems, including large ones like this. And I think somebody with experience probably is in a critical part of that. For Michigan, there's a geothermal association at earthcomfort.com, and there a number of the Michigan installers, including the representatives for Water Furnace, which is one of the 2 brands that Chris's congregation used. So that might be a place to start looking in the geothermal trade association, earthcomfort.com. Liza had her hand up as well.
Hi, yeah, my name's Liz, and then my last name starts with an H, so that's what that's about.
Sorry,
That's no
Liz.
problem. So, so I get the solar. The solar you paid 173,000, and it looks like you're gonna save 173,000 in 10 years or so. I mean, it's gonna pay for itself. But the geothermal costs 300 and something thousand, and and you're saying, will it pay for itself? Is it going to pay for itself ever, or is it going to just make you feel better? Tell me, and then
yeah, it should pay for itself in about 30 years, but that's the life of the system. And so essentially what we did was we used the savings on the solar to pay for the geothermal. And partially we needed the geothermal because we needed air conditioning, and it would have cost almost as much to do conventional air conditioning, given that we had to retrofit our whole facility. But we also really wanted to care for the earth, and so it made sense to do it.
All right, so then did you think about air to air? Because I have heard this about geothermal, that in northern climes, it's not quite enough for a cold day, so you still need a supplement. And I was wondering did you think about air-to-air heat pumps? Did you think about other systems?
We did not look into that, although I think we are going to look into that for the sanctuary. I may be wrong. I don't know a lot about the air to air, but that's the above ground heat pumps, right? Isn't that what that is?
Right,
And
yeah.
we had those in Georgia when we lived there, and we had to have heat strips on those too. So my sense is they need supplemental heat too. It's not geothermal or air to air. You still sometimes need supplemental heating.
Okay.
I could be wrong on that though, because I'm not an expert on those by any means.
All right, thank you. Again, it just seemed like a really huge expense, the geothermal, and I was struck by that, and a really big intervention too, right?
Well,
Yeah.
we've gone quarter past the hour, and so I think our time has run out, but I'd like to thank our guest Chris for spending her evening with us, telling you about your congregation's geothermal and solar voyage. Really quite helpful and interesting. Thank you everybody who was joining us. We will save a recording of this so that folks who want to go back and um, learn more can check it out. And in the meantime, I wish us all a good green voyage. And thanks again to Chris Todd for her wonderful presentation.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.